Imagine a world where money itself vanished from existence, leaving entire kingdoms on the brink of collapse. In the mid-15th century, Europe faced a chilling crisis so dire that historians named it the Great Bullion Famine, a time when silver and gold, the lifeblood of the medieval economy, simply ran dry. Coins were the heartbeat of trade and taxes, fueling markets and monarchies alike. Unlike today, where central banks can print paper money at will, medieval rulers had no such luxury. When the silver and gold disappeared, so did their money supply. As these precious metals grew scarce, markets froze, wages went unpaid in real currency, and everyone, from humble merchants to mighty kings, watched their treasuries dwindle to nothing. The Bullion Famine wasn't a random calamity. It was a perfect storm of economic chaos, geopolitical upheaval, and technological limits. Picture this: Europe, obsessed with exotic luxuries like spices and silk from the Middle East and Asia, poured its silver eastward to pay for these treasures. Western merchants sent mountains of coin to the east, but what came back? Far less than what left. Over time, bullion drained from Europe faster than it could be replaced. Could the continent's mines have saved the day by producing more silver and gold? Perhaps, if they weren't already failing. By the 1400s, Europe's mines were in steep decline. Easily accessible veins were tapped out, and miners, limited by primitive tools, struggled to dig deeper into the earth. Take the famous silver mines of Bohemia. For instance, they produced only a fraction of their former bounty by the 15th century. But that wasn't all. The Black Plague of the 14th century had already ravaged Europe's population, decimating the mining workforce and leaving villages in ruin. Add to that endless conflicts like the 100 Years' War in Western Europe and battles in the Balkans that disrupted trade routes and drained royal coffers. In the East, the rising Ottoman Empire seized control of the Balkan silver mines, a critical source that once supplied European mints. Even the flow of gold from West Africa, long carried through trans-Saharan trade routes, had trickled to a halt by the 15th century, cutting off yet another lifeline. Europe was bleeding wealth, and no one knew how to stop it. By the 1450s, the crisis reached its peak. More silver was leaving than could ever be replaced, and gold was just as scarce. People at the time were desperate for answers. Why was this happening? Many pointed fingers at hoarding, claiming merchants were stashing coins in secret vaults, too afraid to spend them. And sure, uncertainty might have driven some to hide their wealth, but hoarding was just a small piece of a much darker puzzle. The true culprits were far more sinister. A continent hemorrhaging its money abroad while its mines withered amid plague and war. The Bullion Famine unleashed chaos on trade, labor, and governance. Commerce ground to a halt without cash to fuel it. Without enough silver and gold in circulation, buying and selling became a nightmare, forcing people into clumsy barter systems, trading goods like bread for cloth instead of using coins. The crisis struck the workforce hard. Employers couldn't pay wages in real money, leaving workers furious when handed food or fabric instead. In England, the situation grew so dire that in 1464, King Edward IV issued a decree. Cloth workers must be paid in true and lawful money, not goods. But even with this law, the complaints didn't just stop. There simply wasn't enough silver to go around for artisans and laborers. Everyday life for many slipped back into a barter economy, a step backward in time. Governments, too, teetered on the edge as their treasuries ran dry. Kingdoms needed coins to pay soldiers, equip ships, and uphold justice. As bullion vanished, mints from England to Florence slowed or stopped production entirely. Desperate rulers turned to debasement, mixing cheaper metals into coins to stretch their dwindling supply. This trick allowed more coins to be minted, but at a cost. Each coin held less precious metal, sparking inflation and shattering public trust. By the mid-15th century, Europe was trapped in an economic slump, and social unrest erupted as communities buckled under the pressure. Yet, some financial hubs survived better than others. How did they do it? The trading cities of the Low Countries, for instance, leaned on advanced credit networks and alternative currencies to keep commerce alive, even when silver was nowhere to be found. Escaping the bullion famine demanded grit, ingenuity, and a thirst for exploration. One solution lay in reviving Europe's mines. The desperate need for metal sparked a wave of innovation in mining technology. By the mid-1400s, miners introduced new pumps and tools to dig deeper into exhausted mines. This breakthrough led to fresh discoveries and better yields in Central Europe, where rich silver veins were uncovered in the 1450s and beyond. These new mines didn't solve the crisis overnight, but they slowly rebuilt Europe's coin supply, easing the worst of the shortages. Another lifeline came from beyond Europe's borders. Portugal's daring explorers took to the seas, sailing down the West African coast in search of gold. By the 1440s, they were hauling back African gold from trading posts on the Guinea Coast, a golden lifeline that let mints strike more coins and breathe life back into commerce. Then, in 1498, Vasco da Gama's expedition carved a sea route to India, giving Europeans direct access to Asian markets. No longer did they need to bleed silver to middlemen for Eastern goods. They could trade directly. But the true game-changer arrived with the Age of Discovery. What drove explorers like Christopher Columbus to cross the Atlantic? The hunt for precious metals, among other riches, fueled their voyages. Columbus's 1492 journey, meant to reach Asia, instead stumbled upon the Americas. Within decades, the Spanish were shipping treasure back home by the shipload. By the 1530s, silver from the Americas' rich mines flooded Europe, finally ending the Bullion Famine for good. By the mid-16th century, Europe's money supply was more abundant than ever, ushering in a new economic era. But here is the twist. This flood of bullion sparked inflation in the 1500s, a new crisis born from the ashes of the old. The Bullion Famine left a permanent mark on Europe, reshaping how it handled money and trade forever. With coins so scarce, people were forced to innovate, laying the early seeds of capitalism through credit and banking. Without enough metal money, merchants and financiers turned to letters of credit, bills of exchange, and paper promises. Italian banking houses in Florence and Venice led the charge, crafting sophisticated accounting systems to track transactions without cash, essentially creating money on paper. This reliance on credit and trust kept commerce alive and proved the power of banking networks. Now let's shift gears to a different mystery one, steeped in tradition and spirituality. Behind every graceful move of Japan's iconic tea ceremony lies a hidden story most people never hear. It's a tale of powerful aristocrats, fierce samurai, brutal power struggles, Zen masters rejecting luxury, and even shadowy deaths. Ready to uncover how a simple cup of tea became the soul of Japanese high culture? Tea first arrived in Japan from China during the Heian period, from 794 to 1185 AD. The earliest record of tea in Japan dates to the early 9th century, when Buddhist monks, after studying in Tang Dynasty China, brought back tea leaves and the art of preparing them. Back then, tea took the form of dancha, or brick tea. Leaves were compressed into bricks, shaved into boiling water, and often mixed with spices to create a tonic. This brew was celebrated for its stimulating and medicinal powers, and high aristocrats eagerly adopted it, swept up in their fascination with Chinese culture. But as Japan's missions to China halted with the Tang Dynasty's decline, the court's love for tea faded. The trend of tea drinking dwindled among nobles, surviving only in Buddhist monasteries, where the practice was quietly preserved through the late Heian era. A new era dawned in the Kamakura period, from 1185 to 1333. During this time, Japan discovered powdered green tea matcha from China. This period also saw the rise of Zen Buddhism, which would shape the Japanese tea ceremony in profound ways. The monk Aisai, founder of Japan's Rinzai Zen school, returned from Song, China with tea seeds and the ritual of preparing powdered tea. In Chinese monasteries, tea fueled rituals and meditation, and Aisai championed it in Japan as a path to health and spiritual growth. He planted tea bushes on temple grounds and praised tea's virtues in his 1211 treatise, Kissa Yojoki, or Drinking Tea for Health. Aisai even gifted tea to Shogun Minamoto Sanetomo, reportedly curing the ruler's ailment and winning over the samurai elite to tea's benefits. With the support of warriors and clergy, tea cultivation spread. By the 14th century, it stretched far beyond the old capitals. Once an exclusive luxury, tea became more accessible, yet still a symbol of refinement and status. As tea drinking took root among the warrior class, it evolved into new social traditions. In the Muromachi period, From 1336 to 1573, Japan's Ashikaga shoguns embraced an elegant tea and art culture inspired by Chinese models. Shoguns like Ashikaga Yoshimasa collected Chinese paintings, ceramics, and utensils for lavish tea gatherings. They built specialized rooms to showcase these treasures during tea service, where attendants prepared tea while lords and guests marveled at imported tea bowls and cups. Tea drinking became a grand spectacle of entertainment and connoisseurship. A game called tocha, or tea guessing, emerged. Participants drank multiple bowls of tea and competed to guess the leaves' origins. Records from the 14th century describe massive tea contests where 100 bowls were tasted, with winners earning prizes like bags of gold dust. While this aristocratic tea culture reveled in luxury, a quieter movement was brewing, one that would redefine the tea ceremony entirely. By the 15th century, tea's aesthetic shifted toward simplicity and spirituality, guided by Zen ideals. Murata Juko, credited as the founder of the Wobicha style, introduced a new kind of tea gathering around 1486, rejecting the shogun's extravagant banquets. His vision was a rustic, tranquil tea ceremony rooted in natural simplicity and imperfection. Murata Juko taught that tea wasn't just a drink, it was a discipline to purify the mind and body. In practice, this meant favoring small, austere spaces and humble utensils over lavish halls and imported Chinese wares. The tea ceremony reached its pinnacle in the late 16th century under Sen no Rikyu, Japan's most legendary tea master. He served as tea advisor to Oda Nobunaga and Toyotomi Hideyoshi, two of Japan's unifiers, spreading his influence far and wide. He might have served Tokugawa Ieyasu too, but as you'll see, his ideals clashed with powerful feudal lords. Rikyu took simplicity to its extreme, prioritizing down-to-earth sincerity over showiness in the tea room. In the tea huts he designed, space and light were stripped down to focus the senses on the moment. The entryway was a tiny door, forcing all guests, regardless of status, to crawl through, humbling everyone in a meditative space. Inside, decor was minimal, perhaps a single flower in a simple, imperfect vase, a hanging scroll of Zen poetry, and the few utensils needed for tea. Rikyu often picked humble, everyday objects as tea tools. Even a wooden bucket might serve as a freshwater jar, challenging the idea that only fancy imports were worthy. He also collaborated with craftsmen to create implements that embodied simplicity. Rikyu worked with master potters to craft hand-molded raku-ware tea bowls, with simple shapes and muted glazes, a stark contrast to exquisite Chinese ceramics. But despite his focus on simplicity, Hideyoshi, his patron, used tea ceremonies to flaunt power, delighting in having Kyoto aristocrats humble themselves before him. In 1587, Hideyoshi hosted a lavish open-air tea event in Kyoto for high society, even commissioning a portable tea room covered in gold leaf. Rikyu's ethos of restraint and spiritual depth clashed with Hideyoshi's extravagance, creating tension. Their relationship ended tragically in 1591 when Hideyoshi, for reasons still unknown, handed Rikyu a weapon and declared his time on Earth was over. Despite this shocking end, Rikyu's legacy lived on through the Edo period. From 1603 to 1868, the Tokugawa government embraced the tea ceremony as a tool to refine the decommissioned samurai class. Instead of fighting, these warriors now studied poetry and performed elaborate tea ceremonies, a striking transformation. Rikyu's descendants and disciples preserved his teachings, founding enduring tea schools. His grandson, Sen no Soten, and Soten's sons established the three main schools of the tea ceremony, each tracing their lineage to Rikyu. Feudal lords developed their own styles, and over time, the practice spread beyond the elite.
The art of tea, once exclusive to monks, Kyoto nobles, and high-ranking samurai, became part of bourgeois cultural education by the Meiji era. By then, it was seen as the essence of Japanese refinement, as if it had always been so. In the Meiji period, the tea ceremony saw yet another shift. Once dominated by men, it was women of the Meiji era who took up the art, preserving a vital piece of Japanese culture. As of 2016, the latest study showed that 80% of tea ceremony participants are now women, a remarkable change. Now, let's journey back to medieval Europe. where its waterways once buzzed with a very different kind of mystery. Picture rivers teeming with beavers, industrious rodents, felling trees and damming streams. The European beaver was once everywhere, from the British Isles to Scandinavia and eastward into Siberia. But starting in the medieval period, this fur-laden creature began to vanish from the heart of Europe. What happened? For thousands of years, European beavers thrived in rivers, wetlands, and forests across the continent. Archaeological finds and historical records show they were a common sight in ancient times, so much so that early European cultures wove them into folklore and daily life. Yet, by the Middle Ages, their fate took a dark turn. Beaver pelts and products became prized commodities, and relentless hunting began to decimate their numbers. By medieval times, beaver populations had plummeted across Europe, clinging to survival in remote marshes and inaccessible refuges. Centuries ago, the beaver had already vanished from vast stretches of its former range. In the British Isles, the beaver disappeared, early gone from England and Wales by the 13th century and from Scotland by the 16th century. In Portugal, they were extinct by around 1450. Though they held on in Spain until the 17th century. This pattern repeated across Western Europe as human demand for resources soared, and beavers were hunted in unsustainable numbers. What drove this decline? The biggest culprit was the value of beaver. Beaver fur is dense and water-resistant, perfect for crafting warm, durable felt. Long before synthetic materials, this pelt was a treasure for clothing and hat making. As early as the medieval period, European hatters and tailors coveted beaver fur for luxurious felt hats, coat trims, and garments. This demand only grew over time. By the early modern period, a beaver felt hat was a status symbol among Europe's elite, driving hunters to track down every beaver they could find. By the 1600s, beavers were so scarce in Western Europe that traders turned to North America, where beavers were abundant for a time.
The hunt for beaver fur fueled much of the exploration and European settlement of North America, with millions of pelts shipped to European markets. The European beaver's decline had a global impact, igniting a transatlantic fur trade and even the colonization of a continent. But fur wasn't the only reason beavers were hunted. Another draw was castoreum, a pungent, oily secretion from glands near the beaver's tail. Castoreum held near-mythical status in historical medicine and perfumery. From ancient Rome to the Renaissance, apothecaries hailed it as a cure-all for ailments like headaches, fever, and even epilepsy. Some medieval physicians believed its strong scent had healing powers. Though we now know these claims were overblown, the belief in castoreum's magic meant nearly every beaver had its castor glands harvested and sold. Perfumers also prized castoreum for luxury fragrances, using it to add leathery, musky notes. But there's an even stranger twist. Cultural and religious practices played a role too. In a bizarre ruling, the Catholic Church once classified beavers as fish for Lent fasting rules. This began in the 17th century when French missionaries in Quebec, facing strict meat bans during Lent, asked the church to allow beaver meat. A theologian in Paris ruled that since beavers lived in water, they counted as fish during Lent. This meant devout Catholics in some regions could eat beaver flesh on Fridays or during Lent without breaking dietary laws. The practice spread back to Europe, giving Catholics free rein to feast on European beavers. So the beaver became a triple target, hunted for its fur, its castoreum, and now, for religious reasons, it wasn't considered meat. Hunting was the main driver of the beaver's decline, but it wasn't the only one. Europe's landscape was transforming dramatically from medieval times onward. As agriculture expanded and settlements grew, wetlands were drained and forests cleared, stripping beavers of their homes. Beavers need riverside woodlands and marshy areas to build lodges and dams. But these same rivers and fertile floodplains were prime targets for farmers and town builders. Across Europe, swamps and beaver wetlands were drained to create farmland or reduce malaria. This habitat destruction amplified the pressure on beavers. In Italy, for instance, historians note that beavers vanished around the early 16th century, as much from habitat loss as from hunting. Yet, the European beaver held on in some regions. By the early 1600s, Russia and Scandinavia, where beavers persisted after vanishing from Britain and much of Western Europe, exported pelts to the rest of the continent. By the late 19th century, the beaver's plight was grim. A process that began in the Middle Ages reached its end. After centuries of unchecked trapping, few beavers remained in the wild. Estimates suggest that by 1900, only about 1,000 European beavers survived across the continent in Asia. In Western Europe, they clung to life in France and Germany, with others in the Russian Empire. From the Atlantic to the Pacific, a species once numbering in the tens of millions had dwindled to a handful of survivors. But there was hope. Norway, with its tiny beaver population, took a bold step. Rather than hunting the last of their beavers, they granted them full legal protection in 1845. This was one of Europe's first wildlife protection laws, created solely to save the animal itself. Beyond economics and culture, the beaver's decline had deep ecological impacts. Beavers are nature's engineers. Their dam building and tree felling create wetlands that support countless species. When beavers vanished from most of Europe, the landscapes they'd shaped for millennia began to unravel in subtle but profound ways. Rivers once slowed by beaver dams and ponds now flowed faster and straighter, increasing erosion and shifting water tables. Seasonal floods, no longer held back by beaver wetlands, roared downstream unchecked. Many wetlands and ponds simply drained away without beaver dams to hold water in the floodplain. Over time, lush, marshy meadows turned into dry ground or simplified stream channels. This habitat loss slashed biodiversity. Countless species that thrived in beaver-formed wetlands lost their homes. We don't know how many species vanished due to the beaver's decline, but it's believed the British Isles were hit hardest. Today, the European beaver has made a comeback, reintroduced across the continent with over 1 million now thriving. It's far below their historical peak, but given they were nearly extinct a century ago, it's a remarkable recovery. What do you think? Could another bullion famine strike today? How would our world cope without money? And what other ancient mysteries are waiting to be unearthed? Click that like button, subscribe, and share this video with your friends to explore more secrets of history with us on Mysteries Unearthed.